My name is Eleanor Williams, and at 68 years old, I never expected my own children to disown me. As a retired nurse, I adopted Madison and Jason after their parents died in a terrible car crash. Little did I know that 30 years later, when I had my own accident, they would tell the hospital, "She is not our real mom, we owe her nothing." What they did not expect was that I would outsmart them when they came for my estate. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you are watching from. Please hit like and subscribe if you want to hear how I taught my ungrateful children the most important lesson of their lives. I always wanted children of my own, but life had other plans for me. After my husband Thomas passed away from cancer when I was only 32, I threw myself into my nursing career at Westlake Medical Center. The long shifts and demanding work helped distract me from my grief and loneliness, but there was always something missing. I had a good life, a modest but comfortable home Thomas and I had bought together, and wonderful friends, but I longed for a family of my own. Then one rainy April evening everything changed. I was working the night shift in the emergency room when the ambulances arrived with the victims of a horrible multi-car pileup on the interstate. Among them were Robert and Catherine Stevens, both critically injured. They didn't make it through the night despite our best efforts. When the social worker told me they had 2 small children who had been at home with a babysitter, my heart broke for those poor little ones. Madison was 5. A solemn little girl with blonde pigtails and the biggest blue eyes I had ever seen. Jason was just 2, clutching a worn teddy bear, too young to understand what had happened. The social worker explained they had no living relatives willing to take them in. Something inside me just knew these children were meant to be mine. "Can I meet them?" I asked impulsively. The first time Madison looked up at me, her eyes full of confusion and fear, I knew I would do anything to protect her. Jason crawled into my lap within minutes of meeting me, as if he had known me his whole little life. I visited them every day at the temporary foster home where they had been placed, bringing small toys and books, reading stories and playing games. It wasn't easy convincing the adoption agency that a single woman in her mid-30s with a demanding career could provide a stable home for 2 traumatized children. But I was determined. I took parenting classes, rearranged my work schedule to accommodate school hours, and even moved to a house closer to a good elementary school. 6 months later, Madison and Jason came home with me permanently. Those early years were challenging but wonderful. Madison had nightmares and would wake up crying for her real mommy. It broke my heart, but I would hold her and rock her back to sleep, telling her it was okay to miss her parents, and that I would always be there for her. Jason was easier in some ways because he was so young, but he went through a phase of extreme clinginess, panicking if I was out of his sight for even a moment. I still remember Madison's first day of kindergarten. She was so brave, clutching her new backpack with dinosaurs on it, because she insisted dinosaurs were cooler than princesses. But I saw the fear in her eyes as she looked at the classroom full of strangers. I knelt down and straightened her little jacket. "You are the bravest, smartest girl I know," I whispered to her. "And I will be right here waiting when school is over." The relief in her eyes when she saw me waiting exactly where I promised at the end of the day is something I will never forget. She ran into my arms and told me all about her day, her earlier fear forgotten. That was the moment I truly felt like her mother. As the years went by, our little family settled into a rhythm. I worked extra shifts and took on private nursing duties on weekends when the children were older to build up their college funds. There were soccer games for Jason and ballet recitals for Madison. There were science projects and birthday parties and chicken pox and all the normal chaos of raising children. I never tried to replace their biological parents. There were photos of Robert and Catherine in our home, and we would talk about them often. On their parents' birthdays and death anniversary, we would bake a cake and look through photo albums I had managed to collect from their parents' friends. I wanted them to know where they came from, to honor those memories while building new ones together. When Madison turned 16, she went through a rebellious phase. She started referring to me as Eleanor instead of Mom, and would throw it in my face during arguments that I wasn't her real mother. It hurt terribly, but my friend Sarah, who was a child psychologist, assured me this was normal teenager behavior, perhaps intensified by Madison's complicated feelings about her adoption. Jason was my easy child during those years. Where Madison was fiery and challenging, Jason was sweet and easygoing. He excelled at sports and had a natural charm that drew people to him. But he also had a tendency to follow his older sister's lead in everything, which would eventually become a problem. I worked so hard to give them everything they needed. When Madison wanted to attend an expensive private university across the country, I took out a second mortgage on my house to supplement her scholarship. When Jason needed braces and later wanted to attend a prestigious hockey camp, I picked up extra weekend shifts to make it happen. Every decision I made was with their well-being in mind. The proudest moments of my life were watching each of them graduate. Madison with her psychology degree, standing tall and confident as she accepted her diploma. Jason 4 years later with his business degree waving to me from the stage. I thought all the sacrifices had been worth it. My children were educated, successful, and ready to take on the world. I had done my job well, or so I believed. Things began to change when Madison met and married Bradford, a wealthy investment banker 10 years her senior. Suddenly, my modest home and middle-class lifestyle seemed to embarrass her. Visits became less frequent, and when she did come, she would make subtle comments about my furniture or clothes being outdated. She began to cancel our traditional Sunday dinners more often than she attended them. Jason followed his sister's lead, as he always had. After moving to the same city as Madison and Bradford, his calls and visits dwindled too. When I did hear from him, it was usually because he needed money for a new business venture, or to help with rent when he was between jobs. He would turn on the charm, calling me Mom, and telling me how much he missed me, but would disappear again once the check was cashed. Despite the growing distance, I never stopped loving them fiercely. I told myself they were just busy building their own lives, that this was natural. When holidays would come and go with only a quick phone call or a generic card, I would make excuses for them to my friends. Madison is so busy with her practice, I would say, or Jason is traveling for work again. But the truth was that my big house had grown very quiet and very lonely. Still, I kept hoping. Every birthday, every Christmas, I would set the table for 3, just in case they decided to come home. I kept their favorite foods stocked in my pantry, and their childhood bedrooms ready for visits. I never gave up hope that one day they would remember the love that had built our family, and they would come back to me. Little did I know how wrong I was. It was an ordinary Tuesday in October when my life changed forever. The morning had started like any other: a cup of coffee, a quick check of the mail, and plans to meet my friend Doris for lunch. The fall air was crisp, and the leaves were just beginning to turn those beautiful shades of red and gold that I look forward to every year. I remember thinking about calling Madison as I drove to meet Doris. It had been over 2 months since we had spoken, and her birthday was coming up in a few weeks. I was debating whether to send her gift early, or try to arrange a visit. I never got to make that decision. According to witnesses, a delivery truck ran a red light at the intersection of Maple and Pine Streets. I never saw it coming. One moment I was driving and thinking about my daughter, and the next I was surrounded by the screeching sound of metal crushing metal, the airbag exploding in my face, and then darkness. I have only fragments of memories from the immediate aftermath. Sirens wailing, someone asking me my name, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, a paramedic saying something about internal bleeding and a collapsed lung, being lifted onto a stretcher, the bumpy ride in the ambulance. Then nothing again as they put me under for emergency surgery. When I finally woke up, the pain was overwhelming despite the medication. My chest felt like it was on fire with every breath. My left arm and leg were in casts. My face felt swollen and strange. But worse than the physical pain was opening my eyes to an empty room. No flowers. No cards. No family anxiously waiting for me to wake up. Just the steady beeping of monitors and the antiseptic smell of the hospital. Dr. Anderson came in shortly after I regained consciousness. I recognized him immediately. He had been a young resident when I was still working at Westlake, and now he was a distinguished surgeon with gray at his temples. "Eleanor," he said gently, "you gave us quite a scare. The surgery went well, but you have a long recovery ahead. You had substantial internal bleeding, a punctured lung, a broken arm and leg, and several cracked ribs. You're going to be with us for a while." I nodded, each tiny movement sending fresh waves of pain through my body. "Did anyone call my children?" I managed to ask, My voice raspy from the breathing tube they had removed. Something flickered across Dr. Anderson's face, a look of discomfort, perhaps even pity. Yes, we contacted both Madison and Jason as soon as you were out of surgery. They were listed as your emergency contacts. Are they coming? I asked, already sensing the answer from his expression. Dr. Anderson looked away, suddenly very interested in my chart. Perhaps you should rest now. We can talk more later. But I needed to know. Please tell me. Are my children coming? He was saved from answering by the arrival of Nurse Rachel Martinez, who had worked with me years ago before I retired. She bustled in with professional efficiency, checking my foreign vitals, but her eyes were kind and familiar. Rachel, I said, please tell me what's going on. Why aren't my children here? Rachel glanced at Dr. Anderson, who gave her a small nod before excusing himself. Once he was gone, she pulled up a chair next to my bed. Eleanor, I'm so sorry, she began, taking my hand carefully to avoid disturbing the four. We called both Madison and Jason immediately after your surgery. They said they couldn't come. Couldn't come. I repeated, confused. Are they out of town? Are they sending someone else? Rachel's grip on my hand tightened slightly.
No, Eleanor.
When the hospital administrator explained the seriousness of your condition, well, Madison said, and I quote, she's not our real mom, we owe her nothing. Jason was with her and agreed. They said not to contact them again unless it was about your estate. The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I couldn't breathe, and the monitors beside me registered my distress with urgent beeping. Rachel quickly adjusted my oxygen and spoke soothingly until my vitals stabilized. But nothing could stabilize the earthquake happening in my heart. There must be some mistake, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I raised them. For over 30 years, I was their mother in every way that matters. I know, Rachel said, her own eyes glistening with tears. I remember when you adopted them. I remember how much you loved them. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. The pain of that betrayal was worse than all my physical injuries combined. I had devoted my life to those children, loved them unconditionally, sacrificed my own needs and wants countless times to give them everything they needed. And in my moment of greatest need, they had dismissed me as if I were nothing to them. Just a placeholder until they could claim whatever material possessions I might leave behind. The next few days passed in a blur of pain medication, medical procedures, and overwhelming grief. I developed pneumonia as a complication from my injuries, and there were moments when the doctors weren't sure I would make it. Through it all, my hospital room remained empty of family visitors.
No Madison.
No Jason. Just the steady stream of healthcare professionals and the occasional visit from old colleagues who had heard about my accident. Rachel became my lifeline during those dark days. She would stay after her shift to sit with me, sometimes just in silence, sometimes chatting about hospital gossip to distract me. She brought me small comforts, a softer blanket from home, my favorite tea, audiobooks to listen to when the pain kept me awake at night. Why are you being so kind to me? I asked her one evening, when the weight of abandonment felt particularly heavy. Because you would do the same for me, she said simply. And because I remember how you fought for those children when you were adopting them, how you would work a 12-hour shift and then go straight to the foster home to read them bedtime stories. You deserve better than this, Eleanor. As my physical condition slowly stabilized, my emotional state went through its own evolution. The initial shock and heartbreak began to harden into something else. Not hatred, I could never hate Madison and Jason no matter what they had done. But a cold clarity began to emerge from the fog of pain and betrayal. A determination that if my children saw me as nothing more than a source of inheritance, then perhaps it was time to reconsider what they deserved from me. I had always planned to leave everything to Madison and Jason, of course. My house, my savings, the life insurance policy, some modest investments, the nest egg I had carefully built over decades of hard work. It wasn't a fortune by any means, but it was substantial enough, especially the house, which had appreciated significantly over the years. Now, lying in that hospital bed with the knowledge that my children were waiting for me to die so they could claim their windfall, I began to form a different plan. If I survived, and the doctors were increasingly confident that I would need to make some changes. Not out of vengeance, but out of a newfound understanding of who my children had become. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after my accident, I asked Rachel to help me make a phone call. "Who do you want to call?" she asked, already reaching for the hospital phone. "My lawyer," I replied. "It's time I updated my will." Physical therapy was excruciating. Every movement sent daggers of pain through my body, but I pushed through it with a determination that surprised even my therapists. I had always considered myself a strong person you have to be to work as a nurse for decades and to raise 2 children on your own. But now I found reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. "You're making remarkable progress, Eleanor," my physical therapist, Keith, said during one particularly challenging session. "Most patients with injuries as severe as yours would still be confined to bed." I gritted my teeth as I took another step with the walker, my broken leg protesting with each movement. "I don't have the luxury of weakness," I replied. "I need to be independent again as soon as possible." What I didn't tell Keith was that my determination stemmed from a plan that was forming in my mind. A plan that required me to be mobile and self-sufficient much sooner than the doctors anticipated. I had decisions to make and actions to take that couldn't happen from a hospital bed. It was during one of these physical therapy sessions that I met Margaret Williams. She was recovering from a hip replacement and had the bed next to mine after I was moved out of intensive care. In her 70s, with silver hair always perfectly styled despite hospital conditions, Margaret had a sharp wit and took no nonsense from anyone. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she commented one day, watching me struggle back to my bed after therapy. "Healing isn't a race, you know. It is when you're running from something," I replied without thinking. Margaret raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That was the beginning of our friendship. Over the next few days we began to talk more. She told me about her 3 children and 7 grandchildren, all of whom called and visited regularly. I eventually told her about Madison and Jason, about their rejection and abandonment. "Blood doesn't make family," Margaret said firmly after hearing my story. "And apparently neither does 30 years of love and sacrifice. Some people are just selfish at their core." "They weren't always like this," I said, feeling the need to defend the memory of the sweet children they had once been. "Something changed them. Or something revealed who they truly are," Margaret countered. "Adversity doesn't build character, Eleanor. It reveals it." Her words stayed with me, bringing both pain and clarity. Maybe she was right. Maybe the materialistic, uncaring adults Madison and Jason had become were always there beneath the surface, and I had been too blinded by love to see it. A week after that conversation, I asked one of the nurses to help me contact my lawyer, Harrison Montgomery. Harrison had been my lawyer for over 20 years, handling everything from my mortgage refinancing to my will and healthcare directives. He was also one of the few people who knew the full story of Madison and Jason's origins, having helped with their adoption. "Eleanor, I was so worried when I heard about your accident," Harrison said when he came to visit me the next day. At 65, he was still practicing law and showed no signs of slowing down. "I would have come sooner if I had known. Why didn't your children contact me?" The question stung, but I had grown somewhat accustomed to the pain. I explained the situation to Harrison, whose expression grew increasingly grave as I spoke. "I want to change my will," I concluded, "and I need your advice on some other legal matters as well." Harrison nodded, his expression somber. "Of course. What did you have in mind?" Over the next 2 hours, I outlined my plan to Harrison. I wanted to create a charitable foundation that would help orphan children find loving homes and support adoptive families. The majority of my estate would go to this foundation. I would leave Madison and Jason each a small trust with specific conditions attached, conditions that reflected the values I had tried to instill in them. "This is all legally sound," Harrison assured me when I had finished explaining. "But are you certain this is what you want? Changing your will under these circumstances, they might contest it." "Let them try," I said, a new firmness in my voice. "I'm of sound mind, and I have excellent medical documentation of that fact, thanks to my stay here. And Harrison, there's something else I need your help with." The something else was trickier. I wanted to temporarily disappear once I was discharged from the hospital. Not permanently. I wasn't planning to fake my death or anything so dramatic. But I needed time away from Madison and Jason, Time to heal both physically and emotionally without them showing up when they finally realized there was an inheritance at stake. Harrison looked skeptical. Eleanor, disappearing isn't as simple as it sounds. There are records, paperwork. You'll need ongoing medical care. I know, I acknowledged. I'm not planning to vanish without a trace. I just need to be somewhere they won't think to look for a while. I need space to decide what I truly want my relationship with them to be going forward, without them pressuring me about money. We spent the next hour working out the logistics. Harrison would help arrange for my hospital discharge to show a transfer to a long-term care facility, but I would actually go elsewhere. My medical records would be kept confidential, which was my right as a patient. I would need to pay for my ongoing care privately, but I had the means to do that for a limited time. As Harrison was preparing to leave, Nurse Rachel came in with some surprising news. Eleanor, I thought you should know. Your daughter Madison called the hospital administration office today. She was asking about your condition. A small flicker of hope ignited in my chest. She did. Is she coming to visit? Rachel's expression told me everything before she even spoke. She mainly wanted to know about your insurance coverage, and whether your house would need to be sold to cover medical expenses. When the administrator wouldn't give her that information due to privacy laws, she became unpleasant. The tiny flame of hope extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. And Jason? Has he called? He was with her, apparently. The administrator could hear him in the background asking about the value of your estate. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing this final confirmation of what I already knew. When I opened them again, both Harrison and Rachel were watching me with concern. I'm all right, I assured them, and strangely enough it was true. The pain was still there, but it was dulled by resolution. Rachel, how soon do you think I might be discharged? Dr. Anderson was talking about another week depending on how your physical therapy progresses, she replied. Why? Because I have plans to make, I said, looking at Harrison. And not much time to make them. Over the next few days, as I continued my aggressive physical therapy regimen, Harrison and I finalized my new will and the details of my temporary disappearance. Margaret, who had been discharged but continued to visit me daily, offered her vacation home in a small coastal town about 3 hours away. No one uses it this time of year, she insisted. And it's all on one level, perfect for someone recovering from injuries. Plus, I have a wonderful doctor friend in town who can continue your care discreetly. I was overwhelmed by her generosity. Margaret, we've only known each other for a few weeks. Why would you do this for me? She patted my hand, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Because I love a good scheme, especially one that teaches ungrateful children a lesson. And because you remind me of myself 30 years ago. Tough as nails on the outside, too soft-hearted on the inside. With Margaret's help and Harrison's legal expertise, everything was arranged. My discharge papers would show a transfer to Pinecrest Recovery Center, but I would actually go to Margaret's beach house. Harrison would monitor my home and handle any legal issues that arose. Rachel agreed to help with the medical aspects of the transfer. On the day before my planned discharge, Rachel brought me more news about Madison and Jason. They've been calling daily now, she reported. Always asking about your financial situation, never about your health. Today they wanted to know if you had signed any documents or changed any legal paperwork since being admitted. I smiled grimly. They're getting nervous. Good. There's more, Rachel continued. They told the administrator they're planning to come see you tomorrow. They said they've been too overwhelmed with grief to come until now, so they were finally making their move. Sooner than I expected, but not before I was ready. I looked at Rachel, then at Margaret, who was visiting again. Well, I said with more calm than I felt, it seems our timeline has just been accelerated. Let's make sure everything is in place for tomorrow. That night, as I lay awake in my hospital bed for what would be the last time, I thought about the children I had raised. The bedtime stories and skinned knees. The graduations and first heartbreaks. 30 years of memories that would always be part of me, regardless of what happened next. I wondered if they ever truly loved me, or if I had just been a convenient solution to their childhood tragedy. I didn't have answers to those questions, and maybe I never would. But as dawn broke on what would be a pivotal day, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I deserved better than what they had given me. And it was finally time to stand up for myself. The morning of my planned discharge was busy with preparations. Dr. Anderson did a final examination and signed my release papers, though he still believed I was transferring to Pinecrest Recovery Center rather than embarking on my own plan. "You've made remarkable progress, Eleanor," he said, reviewing my chart. "But you still have a long road ahead. Promise me you'll follow all the recovery protocols at Pinecrest." "I promise to take excellent care of myself," I replied carefully. Not quite a lie, but not the full truth either. Rachel had arranged for my discharge to happen at 10 a.m., knowing from the administration office that Madison and Jason had said they would arrive around noon. This gave us a 2-hour window to execute our plan. Margaret arrived at 9:30, bringing with her comfortable clothes for me to change into. She had already driven my packed suitcase to her beach house the day before. "Everything's ready at the house," she assured me as she helped me change out of the hospital gown. "My friend Dr. Collins will stop by this evening to check on you, and I've stocked the kitchen with all the essentials." "Margaret, I can never repay you for this kindness," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Nonsense," she replied briskly. "Just get better and then find a way to pay it forward. That's all the repayment I need." By 9:45, I was dressed and seated in a wheelchair, as hospital policy required for discharge. Rachel had all my paperwork and prescriptions ready. Harrison arrived right on schedule at 9:50. "The car is waiting at the side entrance," he informed us. "I've spoken with hospital security to ensure privacy during the transfer." Before leaving, I had one last task. I took out an envelope from my purse, one that Harrison had helped me prepare. Inside was a letter to Madison and Jason, along with some legal documents they would need to see. "Rachel, would you make sure this is given to my children when they arrive?" I asked, handing her the sealed envelope. "Of course," she promised. "I'll give it to them personally." At precisely 10 a.m., Rachel wheeled me out through the side entrance of the hospital, where Harrison's car was waiting. The timing had to be perfect. We needed to be well away before there was any chance of Madison and Jason arriving early. As Harrison drove us away from the hospital, I looked back at the building where I had spent the last 3 weeks. The place where I had learned the painful truth about my children's feelings toward me. I felt a strange mixture of sadness, anxiety, and something else, something that felt surprisingly like freedom. "Are you all right, Eleanor?" Harrison asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I said, realizing it was true. "For the first time in a long while, I think I am." 2 hours later, Madison and Jason arrived at Westlake Medical Center, right on schedule. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but Rachel called Margaret's cell phone later that day to tell us what happened. According to Rachel, they walked into the hospital with an air of somber concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. Madison, looking polished and professional in an expensive suit, approached the reception desk. "We're here to see our mother, Eleanor Williams," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound worried. "We came as soon as we could arrange time away from work." The receptionist checked her computer and frowned. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Williams is no longer a patient here. She was discharged this morning." Madison's perfectly composed expression faltered. "That's impossible. She had multiple broken bones and internal injuries. Where would she go?" "I can page Nurse Martinez, who was handling her care," the receptionist offered. "She might be able to provide more information." When Rachel arrived, she immediately recognized Madison and Jason from photos I had shown her, though they had changed considerably from the loving children in those old pictures. Madison had grown into a strikingly beautiful woman with the same blonde hair and blue eyes she had as a child, but now her eyes held a coldness that was never there before. Jason, once my sweet little boy, was now a tall man with a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Stevens, Mr. Stevens," Rachel greeted them, deliberately using their adoptive last name. "I was your mother's primary nurse during her stay." "Where is she?" Madison demanded, foregoing any pleasantries. "There must be some mistake. She couldn't possibly be well enough to leave. Your mother was transferred to a long-term care facility this morning," Rachel explained. "It was all arranged several days ago." "Which facility?" Jason asked, speaking for the first time. We need to see her immediately. We're her children. Rachel's expression remained professionally neutral, though she later told me it took all her willpower not to tell them exactly what she thought of their behavior. I have a letter your mother left for you, she said, retrieving the envelope from the nurse's station. She asked that I give it to you personally. Madison took the envelope, her perfectly manicured nails contrasting sharply with the plain hospital stationery. This is ridiculous. We need to know where she is, not read some letter. Your mother's wishes and privacy are important to us, Rachel replied firmly. The letter should explain everything you need to know. There's a private waiting room down the hall if you'd like some privacy to read it. Reluctantly, Madison and Jason went to the waiting room. Rachel didn't follow them, but a hospital volunteer later told her they had quite a heated argument after reading the letter. Their voices became so loud that patients in nearby rooms complained. After leaving the hospital, Madison and Jason went directly to my house, using the spare key I had given them years ago for emergencies. Rachel knew this because they called the hospital from my home phone, demanding more information about my whereabouts. The next day, they showed up at Harrison's office without an appointment, insisting on seeing him immediately. Harrison later told me that Madison was particularly aggressive. "Where is my mother?" she demanded as soon as she was shown into his office. "And why were we not consulted about changes to her will?" Harrison, ever the professional, remained calm. "Miss Stevens, Mr. Stevens, I understand this is a difficult time for you. Your mother is receiving excellent care, I can assure you of that. We have a right to know where she is," Jason insisted. "She's not in her right mind after the accident. Any changes she made to her will would be invalid." "On the contrary," Harrison countered, "your mother was thoroughly evaluated by multiple doctors and found to be completely competent to make her own decisions. As for her whereabouts, she has explicitly requested privacy at this time." "This is absurd," Madison fumed. "We're her next of kin. We have rights." "Your mother also has rights," Harrison pointed out, "including the right to privacy and the right to determine who has access to her while she recovers." The meeting ended with Madison threatening legal action and Jason attempting a more conciliatory approach, claiming they were just worried about their dear mother. Harrison saw through both tactics and stood firm. Over the next few days, Madison and Jason launched a campaign to find me. They contacted every long-term care facility within a 100-mile radius. They tried to access my medical records but were blocked by privacy laws. They even hired a private investigator, but Harrison had been thorough in covering our tracks. The letter I had left them explained that I knew they had refused to come when I was critically injured, that I was aware they were only interested in their inheritance, and that I had made changes to my will accordingly. I didn't detail those changes. I wanted them to stew in uncertainty for a while. I also informed them that I needed time away from them to recover and reconsider our relationship, and that Harrison would be in touch when I was ready to speak with them. Their reaction to the letter revealed everything about their true characters. Instead of respecting my wishes or showing genuine remorse, they were angry and indignant that I had taken control away from them. They saw it as a punishment rather than a natural consequence of their actions. As I settled into Margaret's peaceful beach house that first evening, gazing out at the ocean waves from the comfort of a recliner, I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. For the first time in decades, I was putting myself first. It wasn't a feeling I was familiar with, but I decided it was one I could get used to. Margaret's beach house was a single-story bungalow with large windows that filled the rooms with natural light and offered glimpses of the ocean from almost every room. The sound of waves crashing against the shore became the soundtrack of my recovery, both physical and emotional. Dr. Collins, Margaret's friend, visited that first evening as promised. He was a kindly man in his 60s who had semi-retired to this small coastal community after decades of practice in Boston. "Margaret told me a bit about your situation," he said as he checked my vital signs and examined my healing wounds. "Rest assured that your privacy is completely safe with me. As far as anyone in town knows, you're simply Margaret's friend recovering from an accident." His reassurance meant more to me than he could know. The fear of Madison and Jason tracking me down had been lurking at the edges of my mind since leaving the hospital. "Thank you," I said sincerely. I just need some time to heal without complications. Well, you're doing remarkably well physically, he pronounced after completing his examination. Keep up with your physical therapy exercises, take your medications as prescribed, and I'll check in on you again in a few days. The first week at the beach house established a new routine. I would wake early with the sunrise, do my prescribed exercises, and then sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the waves and thinking. Margaret had arranged for a home health aide named Susan to come for a few hours each day to help with meals and household tasks I couldn't yet manage with my healing body. Susan was a godsend not just for her practical help but for her cheerful company. In her 50s with grown children of her own, she never pried into my circumstances but offered friendship that asked nothing in return. My son didn't speak to me for 3 years after I refused to fund his get-rich-quick scheme, she shared one day as she helped me with my walking exercises along the beach. Sometimes loving your children means making choices they won't understand. Her casual revelation that I wasn't alone in having complicated relationships with my children was deeply comforting. As we continued our slow walk along the shore, she pointed out different seashells and told me about the local wildlife, never making me feel pitted or broken. By the second week, I had settled into life in the small coastal town. I was still moving slowly, still in pain, but improving daily. I had Harrison's secure cell phone to maintain contact with him and Margaret, who visited on weekends. The rest of the time, I was anonymous, just another older woman recovering from injuries in a town full of retirees. Harrison kept me updated on Madison and Jason's activities. They had indeed filed a legal petition claiming I was mentally incompetent and needed guardianship, but the extensive documentation of my mental competence from the hospital quickly put an end to that attempt. They're growing desperate, Harrison told me during one of our regular calls. They've been calling my office daily, alternating between threats and pleas. Jason actually broke down crying yesterday, claiming he just wants to make amends. Do you believe him? I asked, surprised at the report of Jason showing such emotion. Harrison sighed. I want to. But then Madison called an hour later demanding to know how much of your estate would still be theirs. It seemed coordinated, like good cop, bad cop. The knowledge that my children were essentially performing for what they thought was a financial audience hurt, but less sharply than before. The distance, both physical and emotional, was providing a clarity I had lacked while in their orbit. As the weeks passed, I began to venture out more into the small community. There was a local library that became my sanctuary, with a kind librarian named Darlene who helped me find books and never commented on my slowly healing bruises or the cane I still needed for walking. You should come to our book club, she suggested one day as I was checking out a stack of novels. We meet every Thursday evening. Nothing too intense, just good books and better conversation. Under normal circumstances, I might have politely declined. I had always been somewhat reserved, focusing my energy on work and my children rather than building a social life of my own. But something about this fresh start made me bold. I'd like that, I heard myself saying. Thank you for the invitation. The book club became a highlight of my week. 6 women ranging in age from 35 to 80, all with their own stories and perspectives. They welcomed me without prying, and for 2 hours every Thursday, I could forget about Madison and Jason and just be Eleanor, a woman who loved books and had opinions worth hearing. Through the book club, I met Gail, a retired social worker who had spent her career placing foster children with adoptive families. When I cautiously shared a little of my background as an adoptive mother, she immediately understood the complexities in a way few others could. Adoption is built on love, not obligation, she told me over coffee after one meeting. You gave those children everything, but you can't make them appreciate it or return it. That's true of all parenting, but adoption adds extra layers of complexity. Her validation that I hadn't failed as a mother, that sometimes children simply make choices we can't control, was healing in ways I hadn't known I needed. A month into my stay, Margaret introduced me to Patrick Hamilton, the director of a local children's advocacy center. In his early 70s, with a booming laugh and boundless energy, Patrick had dedicated his retirement years to helping children in the foster system. Margaret mentioned you might be interested in our work, he said when we met for lunch at a small cafe near the beach. We're always looking for volunteers, even those with limited mobility. I don't know how much help I could be right now, I admitted, gesturing to my healing injuries. but I'd like to learn more. Patrick spent the next hour telling me about the center's work helping foster children maintain connections with siblings, providing enrichment activities, and advocating for better policies. His passion was infectious, and by the end of our meal, I had agreed to come tour the facility. The Children's Center became another anchor in my new life. Twice a week, I would go there to read stories to the younger children, or help teenagers with homework. Many of these children had experienced the same kind of loss and displacement that Madison and Jason had, but without finding a permanent home as they had with me. Working with these resilient young people gave me a sense of purpose I had been missing. It also helped me understand Madison and Jason better, seeing firsthand how early trauma could leave lasting imprints, even with the most loving care. 2 months after my disappearance, Harrison called with news. "Jason came to see me alone today," he reported. "He seemed genuinely distressed about your absence. He admitted that he and Madison had been wrong to reject you when you needed them, and he wants a chance to apologize in person. Do you believe him?" I asked, feeling a familiar tug of hope that I immediately tried to suppress. "I'm not sure," Harrison admitted. "He seems sincere, but it could be another tactic. Madison has been making noise about contesting any changes to your will on the grounds that you've been kidnapped or are being manipulated." I laughed despite myself at the absurdity of it. Kidnapped by whom? Myself. "Logic isn't their strong suit right now," Harrison said dryly. "They're running out of options and getting creative." I considered this new development carefully. Let's wait and see if Jason's apparent change of heart persists. Tell him I'm not ready to meet yet, but that I've received his message and am considering it. After ending the call, I sat on the porch watching the sunset, mulling over this latest development. Was Jason truly remorseful? Or was this just another strategy to get back into my good graces for financial gain? The Eleanor of 6 months ago would have immediately welcomed him back, desperate to believe in his love. But I wasn't that Eleanor anymore. The woman I was becoming was stronger, more discerning, and unwilling to accept less than she deserved from anyone, including her children. That evening, as I wrote in the journal I had started keeping, I realized something important. I was no longer just hiding or healing. I was building a life, a different one than I had planned, but perhaps a better one. One where I was valued for myself, not for what I could provide. One where I had friends who chose to be in my life, not out of obligation but out of genuine connection. For the first time since the accident, I found myself thinking about the future with anticipation rather than dread. Whatever happened with Madison and Jason, and I still wasn't sure what I wanted to happen, I would be okay. More than okay, actually. I would be whole and I would be happy. That certainty felt like the greatest gift I could have given myself. 6 months after my accident, I had settled into a comfortable routine in the coastal town I now called home. My physical recovery had progressed remarkably well. I still had some pain and stiffness in my left leg, especially on rainy days, but I had graduated from a cane to walking unassisted. The scars on my body were fading, and so too were the emotional wounds, though at a slower pace. I had rented a small apartment near the Children's Center where I now volunteered 3 days a week. Margaret still visited regularly, and we had become the kind of friends who could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours with equal ease. I had made other friends too, the book club ladies, Patrick from the center, my neighbors in the small apartment complex. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for my retirement years, but it was a good life, a life I had chosen rather than one that had simply happened to me. Harrison and I had maintained regular contact. Madison had finally given up her legal attempts to have me declared incompetent after multiple failures, but Jason had continued to reach out, his messages becoming seemingly more genuine with time. I still wasn't ready to see either of them, but I had begun to consider the possibility of a cautious reconnection with Jason at some point in the future. Life had found a new rhythm, and I was at peace with it. Which is why I was completely unprepared when fate decided to intervene in the form of a chance encounter at Coastal Cafe, my favorite local coffee shop. I was enjoying a quiet Monday morning with a book and a cup of tea when the bell above the door jingled. I glanced up automatically, then froze. Walking into the cafe, looking as polished and perfect as ever, was Madison. For a moment I thought I was hallucinating. Madison was supposed to be hundreds of miles away, going about her life and periodically harassing Harrison for information about my whereabouts. Yet here she was in my sanctuary, looking like she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine in her expensive clothes and immaculate makeup. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw the shock register on her face, followed quickly by disbelief and then calculation. I remained frozen in place as she approached my table, her high heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floor. "Mother," she said, the word sounding foreign on her lips after so long. What an unexpected surprise. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Madison, what are you doing here?" She slid into the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. "I'm visiting a client who has a vacation home here. I had no idea this was where you'd been hiding all these months." "I haven't been hiding," I corrected calmly, though my heart was racing. "I've been living my life, recovering from injuries that nearly killed me." A flicker of something guilt, perhaps, crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a practiced smile. "Well, you're looking much better than I expected. Harrison made it sound like you were at death's door. The way he refused to tell us where you were." "Harrison was respecting my wishes," I said. "Something you and Jason didn't do when you refused to come to the hospital after my accident." Madison had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "That was a misunderstanding. We were both going through difficult times, and the hospital staff exaggerated the seriousness of your condition." I raised an eyebrow at this blatant lie. "The doctors gave me a 30% chance of survival, Madison. That's not an exaggeration." She waved her hand dismissively. "Water under the bridge now. You've clearly recovered, and we can put this whole unfortunate episode behind us. I'll call Jason right away. He's been beside himself with worry." The speed with which she was attempting to rewrite history and regain control of the narrative was almost impressive. The old Eleanor might have gone along with it, so desperate for reconciliation that she would accept any fiction that allowed for it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "Madison," I said quietly but firmly, "do you remember what you said when the hospital called to tell you I might not survive the night?" She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I'm sure whatever was said was taken out of context. You said, and I quote, 'She's not our real mom, we owe her nothing.' Those were your exact words. There is no context that makes that statement anything other than cruel and calculating." Madison's face hardened. "Fine. You want honesty?" "Yes, I said that. Because it's true. You're not our biological mother. You took us in, which was kind, but don't pretend it wasn't what you wanted. You got the children you couldn't have naturally. We fulfilled your need." Her words stung, but not as much as they once would have. "Is that really how you see the last 30 years? As some kind of transaction?" "Oh, please, spare me the hurt feelings," Madison scoffed. "You're not innocent in all this. You used us too, flaunting your good deed. The childless widow who sacrificed to adopt 2 orphans. I bet it made you feel very noble." I took a moment to truly look at my daughter, the woman I had raised from a solemn 5-year-old into this hard, cynical adult. What had happened to that little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms? Who had once made me a Mother's Day card that said, "Best mom ever," in crooked letters? "I think we should call Jason," I said finally. "If we're going to have this conversation, we should all be present." Madison's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but she nodded and took out her phone. "He's actually in town with me. We're staying at the same hotel." Of course they were. This accidental meeting suddenly felt much less coincidental. 20 minutes later, Jason walked into the cafe. Unlike Madison, who had clearly been preparing for this moment, Jason looked genuinely shocked to see me. He stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening. "Mom," he said, and for a brief moment he looked like my little boy again. "Hello, Jason," I replied, keeping my voice level. He approached the table slowly, as if I might disappear if he moved too quickly. You look good. Healthy." "I am," I confirmed. "Much better than the last time you had an opportunity to see me." Jason at least had the decency to look ashamed. "Mom, I'm so sorry about that. I wanted to come, but Madison said." "Don't you dare blame this on me," Madison interrupted sharply. "You made your own choices. Both of you made choices," I interjected before they could devolve into bickering. "And those choices revealed a great deal about how you see me and our relationship." The cafe had grown quiet, other patrons sensing the tension at our table. I stood up carefully. I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. My apartment is a few blocks from here. They followed me in silence, Madison looking irritated and Jason nervous. My small apartment was clean and simply furnished, with large windows that let in the ocean light. Photos of my new friends adorned the walls, alongside some of my favorite paintings I had asked Harrison to send from my house. "Nice place," Jason commented awkwardly as they sat on my sofa. "Very cozy." "It suits me," I replied, settling into my armchair. "Now, I think it's time we had an honest conversation. No more pretending, no more manipulation." "Fine," Madison said curtly. "Let's start with why you changed your will without telling us." Of course that would be her first concern. I changed my will because I realized it no longer reflected my wishes or values. When my children made it clear they saw me as nothing more than a source of inheritance, I decided that inheritance needed to be reconsidered. "That's not fair," Jason protested. "One mistake, one really bad mistake, and you cut us off completely?" "It wasn't one mistake," I corrected gently. "It was years of growing distance, of calls only when you needed money, of canceled visits and forgotten birthdays. The accident and your response to it was simply the moment when I could no longer deny what our relationship had become." I took a deep breath and continued. "The majority of my estate will now go to a foundation I've established to support orphan children and adoptive families. Each of you will receive a trust fund with specific conditions." Madison's face had grown increasingly flushed with anger. "You can't do that. We're your children. We have rights." "You have the right to whatever I choose to leave you," I corrected. "And I've chosen to leave you enough to help you, but not enough to feed the materialistic values you've embraced." "What conditions?" Jason asked quietly. "For you, Jason, the trust releases funds to match your earned income for 5 years. Every dollar you earn through actual work, not investment schemes, will be matched up to a generous annual cap. After 5 years of consistent employment, the remainder becomes yours without restrictions." He nodded slowly, processing this. "And Madison?" "Madison's trust will provide annual payments for 10 years, with bonuses tied to documented volunteer work with charitable organizations. A minimum of 100 hours per year." Madison stood up, her face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. You're punishing us for not being the perfect children you wanted, for having our own lives instead of revolving around you." "I'm not punishing you, Madison. I'm acknowledging the reality of our relationship and making decisions accordingly. I wanted children who valued family, compassion, and integrity. Instead, I got children who see relationships as transactional and people as means to an end." "That's rich coming from you," Madison spat. "You only adopted us because you couldn't have real children of your own. We were your second choice, your consolation prize." The accusation hit a nerve, as she knew it would. "You were never second choice. From the moment I met you, you were everything I wanted. Then why are you doing this?" Jason asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Why are you throwing away 30 years of family?" "I'm not throwing anything away," I said firmly.
I'm establishing boundaries.
"I'm requiring respect, not just demanding love. And I'm trying to help you become the people I know you can be, people who understand that life is about more than money and status." I looked at them both, these adults who had once been my whole world. "I will always love you both. Nothing can change that, not your rejection, not your anger, not even your cruelty. But love doesn't mean allowing myself to be used or devalued." Madison grabbed her purse and stood up. "This is absurd. Come on, Jason. She's made up her mind. We're nothing but a disappointment to her, and clearly she's found a replacement family." She gestured contemptuously at the photos on my walls. Jason hesitated, looking between Madison and me. "Mom, please. We can work this out. I know I messed up badly, but I want to make it right." For a moment, I saw genuine pain in his eyes, and my heart ached for the relationship we might have had. But I had learned the hard way that words needed to be backed by actions. "My door is open, Jason," I said gently. "But reconciliation will take time and consistent effort. It can't be rushed because you're unhappy with my financial decisions." Madison made a disgusted sound and headed for the door. "This is a waste of time. She's made her choice. Jason stood reluctantly. I don't want to lose you, Mom. You haven't lost me, I assured him. You've just lost the ability to take me for granted. After they left, I sat quietly in my apartment, processing the encounter. It had been painful, yes, but also clarifying. Madison was still entirely focused on what she could get from me. Jason showed glimmers of understanding, but was still heavily influenced by his sister. The confrontation had confirmed what I already knew: my decision to change my life, to value myself enough to demand respect, had been the right one. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about finally acknowledging my own worth, even if my children couldn't or wouldn't do the same. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. They found me, I said when she answered. Madison and Jason. We just had quite the conversation. Are you okay? She asked immediately, concern evident in her voice. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said, realizing it was true.
I'm okay.
Better than okay, actually. I think I'm finally free. 1 year after my accident, I stood on the beach watching the sunset, marveling at how much had changed. My physical injuries had healed almost completely, leaving only a slight limp when I was tired and a few scars that told the story of survival. The emotional wounds had healed too, albeit differently. They had formed their own kind of scars, marks that reminded me of what I had endured and overcome. My small apartment near the beach had become a true home, filled with new memories and friendship. I had expanded my volunteer work at the Children's Center into a part-time paid position, using my nursing background to help coordinate health services for the children. The foundation I had established was up and running, already providing assistance to 10 adoptive families in need. Harrison visited regularly, both as my lawyer and my friend. During his last visit, he had brought news of Madison and Jason. Madison hasn't made any attempt to fulfill the volunteer requirements, he reported, which didn't surprise me. She's filed 2 more legal challenges to the trust conditions, but the judge dismissed both cases. And Jason? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the hope that always flickered when his name came up. Harrison's expression softened. Jason is doing well, actually. He's been working steadily at a marketing firm for 6 months now. The trust has made 4 matching payments so far. More significantly, Jason had begun writing to me regular letters that arrived every 2 weeks like clockwork. The first few had been awkward, stilted, focused mainly on apologies and explanations for his behavior. But gradually, they had evolved into real communication. He shared details about his work, his new apartment, even a stray dog he had rescued and named Max. I wrote back, cautiously at first, then with increasing openness. I told him about my work at the Children's Center, my book club, the coastal community that had embraced me. We were rebuilding something, not what we had before, but perhaps something healthier. 3 months ago, he had asked if he could visit. We had met at the same cafe where Madison had found me, a neutral territory that felt safer somehow than my private home. The meeting had been tentative, emotional, but ultimately positive. Since then, he had visited twice more, each time staying a little longer, our conversations growing more natural. I'm trying to understand why I followed Madison's lead for so long, he had confessed during his last visit. I think I was afraid of being alone. After losing our birth parents, then feeling like I was losing you too when you changed your will, I just defaulted to sticking with Madison, even when I knew she was wrong. His insight showed a level of self-awareness that gave me hope. Jason was doing the hard work of growing up, even in his 30s. Madison, unfortunately, showed no signs of such growth. According to Harrison, she had moved to Los Angeles with her husband, cutting ties with both Jason and me. She had sent one final email, accusing me of turning Jason against her, and declaring that she no longer considered either of us family. The words had hurt, but not with the devastating force they once would have. I had accepted that Madison might never change, never see beyond her own wants and grievances. I could love her from a distance while protecting myself from her toxicity. My new life was full in ways my old one had not been. Margaret and I had become inseparable friends, traveling together to art exhibitions in nearby cities and hosting dinner parties for our expanding social circle. Patrick from the Children's Center had become something more than a friend, our relationship evolving slowly and carefully into a sweet companionship that brought unexpected joy to my life. I never thought I'd find this kind of connection at our age," he had said recently as we walked along the shore, hand in hand. "You're quite the surprise, Eleanor Williams. I had built a chosen family around me, people who valued me for myself, not for what I could give them. The book club ladies who brought me soup when I caught a bad cold last winter. My young neighbor Amy who taught me to use social media so I could keep up with the children at the center. Dr. Collins who still checked in regularly, now more as a friend than a physician." This evening, as I watched the waves roll in under the spectacular sunset, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The accident that nearly took my life had, ironically, given me a new one. The betrayal that broke my heart had ultimately freed me to rebuild it stronger than before. I thought about family, what it meant, how it formed, why it mattered. I had once believed family was defined by blood or legal bonds, by obligation and history. Now I understood it was something more fluid and precious, defined by love freely given, by mutual respect, by showing up for each other not out of duty but out of genuine care. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jason. "Just checking in. Hope you're having a good day. Planning to visit weekend after next if that works for you." I smiled as I typed my reply. "Looking forward to it. Margaret and Patrick want to take us sailing if you're interested." His response came quickly. "Sounds great. Can't wait to see you, Mom." Those 3 words, "see you, Mom," represented a journey of their own. Jason was choosing to be in my life now, not because of inheritance or obligation, but because he wanted the relationship. It wasn't perfect and trust was still building slowly, but it was real in a way our relationship hadn't been for years. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, I turned to walk back to my apartment where friends were gathering for our weekly dinner. My journey had taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that it's never too late to begin again. To stand up for your worth, to rebuild what's broken or create something entirely new. I had lost the family I thought I had, but found something perhaps more precious, a life truly my own, filled with people who chose me as deliberately as I chose them. The inheritance I had once planned to leave my children had instead become an investment in my own happiness, and in helping other families avoid the pitfalls that had damaged mine. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between what you wanted and what you deserved? Between family obligation and self-respect? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like this video if my journey resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal, and share with someone who might need encouragement to value themselves more highly. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to build the life you truly deserve, whatever your age or circumstances.